I didn't expect the weekend to feel any different from the dozens of family visits we'd hosted over the years. Cousin Mark's texts had been brief, something about a work trip in the city and bringing his son along. I'd agreed without much thought. After all, our guest room had been in use for months, and Daniel liked the idea of company. They arrived just after sunset. The air still held the warmth of late spring, and the smell of rain lingered from an afternoon shower. I met them at the door, smiling as Mark stepped in with his usual hearty laugh. Leo followed, rolling a small suitcase behind him. It had been years since I'd last seen him. The boy I remembered was lanky and shy, with a mop of hair that always seemed to fall into his eyes. The man standing before me now was different, taller, his frame lean but assured, posture straight without being stiff. His dark hair was shorter, neatly styled, and his eyes, still the same shade of hazel, seemed older, more deliberate in the way they took in a room. "Adrian," he said warmly, shaking my hand as though we were acquaintances rather than relatives. His smile was quick, almost knowing. We settled into the living room where Daniel and Mark fell into easy conversation. The two of them had been friends as much as relatives for years, swapping old family stories and the occasional harmless jab. I fetched drinks, and as I handed Leo his, our fingers brushed. It was nothing, an accident, but his gaze lingered for a beat longer than politeness required. Dinner passed with the comfort of familiarity. Mark talking about his latest project, Daniel offering to refill glasses, Leo listening more than he spoke. Every so often, I caught him watching me from across the table, not in an overt way, but with a quiet attentiveness, like he was noticing details without meaning to. Later, I retreated to the kitchen to clear the plates. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Leo leaning casually against the counter. "Need help?" he asked. His tone was light, but his eyes stayed fixed on mine. I handed him a stack of plates. "Sure, you can dry." As we worked, he asked about the house, about Daniel, about my work. The questions were harmless, but the way he listened, shoulders slightly angled toward me, voice low as if we were the only two people in the house, made it feel more personal. When the last dish was put away, he stayed a moment longer, leaning back against the counter. "I didn't think I'd remember you much," he said. "But I do. You haven't changed that much, except maybe your eyes." I didn't know what to say, so I laughed it off, making some excuse about getting older. But as I left the kitchen, I caught myself wondering what he had meant. Upstairs, I passed the guest room on my way to fetch fresh towels. The door was ajar, and inside I saw Leo unpacking. He glanced up, meeting my eyes with an expression that was hard to read. Part curiosity, part something else. "Need anything?" I asked. "No," he said, smiling faintly. "Just getting settled." The sound of running water reached me later that night as I passed the bathroom. The door was closed, steam curling out from under it. From inside came a low humming, tuneless, soft but steady. I paused for a second longer than I should have before heading back to my room. Daniel was already in bed, reading. I climbed in beside him, trying to shake the unsettled feeling I couldn't quite name. It was an attraction, not exactly. Not yet. More like a shift in the air, a sense that something unexpected had quietly stepped into my weekend without asking permission. As the rain began again outside, I closed my eyes, telling myself that it was nothing, just family, just coincidence. But the way Leo had looked at me over the kitchen counter stayed with me long after I'd turned out the light. The next day unfolded with the usual rhythm of hosting. Breakfast chatter, coffee cups clinking, Mark discussing his plans for the afternoon. Daniel offered to take him downtown to see an exhibition, and Leo excused himself, saying he might just stay in and catch up on some reading. I told myself I wouldn't read too much into it. Guests needed their own space. Still, when the front door closed behind Daniel and Mark, the house felt different. Quieter, yet somehow charged. I spent the early evening catching up on emails in the study. Around 8, I wandered into the kitchen, fixing myself a drink. I heard movement upstairs, light footsteps, the sound of a door closing, and then the steady rush of water. It had been a long day, and the thought of a bath appealed to me. Daniel wouldn't be back until late, and the house was still except for the hum of the pipes. I gathered fresh towels and made my way toward the bathroom, steam already clouding the hallway air. When I pushed the door open, I froze. Leo was there, half submerged in the tub, steam curling around him like mist over warm stones. His head rested back against the rim, eyes half closed, but when he heard me, they opened, slowly, deliberately, and then he smiled. It wasn't the quick, polite smile from last night's handshake. This one was slower, warmer, carrying an unspoken familiarity that had no place between us. I thought you were out with the others. I managed, my voice catching somewhere between surprise and restraint. I was going to be, he said casually, but the idea of a hot bath was better. He shifted slightly, water rippling against the porcelain. Did you want to use it? The question hung in the air, layered with more than one meaning. I gripped the towels tighter. No, I'll wait. His gaze lingered on me, steady but unhurried. You don't have to, he said, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. My mind was a jumble, awareness of the thin line between us, the impropriety of standing there, the heat from the steam blurring my better judgment. Yet I couldn't seem to move. Comfortable? I asked, trying to pull the exchange back into something safe. Very, he replied. It's a nice tub. You can tell when someone cares about their space. His eyes flicked briefly to mine, a spark of amusement or was a challenge, before drifting back toward the tiled wall. I stepped back, meaning to close the door, but his voice stopped me. You got that look again. I hesitated. What look? The one from last night, he said simply, when you didn't think I'd notice. The words hit harder than they should have. I couldn't tell if he was teasing or testing me, but either way, he was right. I had been looking. I forced a half smile. I'll let you finish your bath. Sure, he said, though the way he watched me leave made it feel like the conversation hadn't ended. Back in my room, I set the towels down and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the faint splash of water down the hall. I told myself it was nothing, a misunderstanding, but the image of that smile, framed by the haze of steam, wouldn't leave me. I tried reading, then checking my phone, anything to fill the space in my mind, but it was useless. Every small sound from upstairs sharpened my awareness. Water draining, footsteps across the bathroom floor, the creak of the guest room door closing. When Daniel and Mark returned later, the house filled again with conversation and the scrape of chairs on hardwood. I poured wine, laughed where I should, answered questions about my day. But every time I caught Leo's eye across the table, it was there again, that same quiet, knowing look. And I realized something unsettling. It wasn't just that he had smiled at me in the bath. It was that he had done it like he knew exactly what it would do to me. The morning after the bath felt like any other at first. Sunlight filtering through the kitchen blinds, the smell of coffee drifting through the air, Mark's deep voice mixing with the sound of clinking mugs. But beneath the surface, I could feel the shift. It wasn't in the words spoken, but in the pauses between them, in the way my mind kept circling back to the steam, the smile, the quiet defiance in Leo's eyes. He sat across from me at the breakfast table, casual in a faded t-shirt, hair still damp from a shower. Our conversations were polite, safe, about the weather, about Mark's travel schedule, but every so often, his gaze would catch mine and hold it just long enough to remind me of last night. Daniel seemed oblivious, laughing at one of Mark's stories. I envied that ease, the ability to be fully present without the weight of unspoken things pressing on the mind. When breakfast was over, Mark announced they'd be leaving after lunch. We've got a long drive ahead, he said, stretching his arms. I nodded, tried to mask the strange pull of relief and regret. Leo disappeared upstairs for a while, and I found myself pacing in the study, pretending to tidy stacks of unopened mail. Part of me wanted to avoid him until they were gone, to let the moment dissolve into the past before it grew into something harder to forget. Another part, quieter, more dangerous, wanted to see if he would say something, anything, that would confirm I hadn't imagined the entire thing. It was almost noon when I heard a soft knock at the study door. I turned to find Leo, leaning against the frame, his hands in his pockets. "Got a minute?" he asked. I nodded, though my throat had tightened. He stepped inside, closing the door halfway behind him. I just wanted to thank you for letting us stay. It was good seeing you again. His tone was polite enough, but there was something in the way he lingered on the word again that made my pulse quicken. You're welcome, I said, keeping my voice steady. He studied me for a moment, then added, You looked different last night. Not bad, just different. It was a simple sentence, yet it carried the same unshakable weight as a smile in the bath. I couldn't think of a response that didn't feel like an admission, so I said nothing. Leo's mouth curved slightly, as though my silence was the answer he'd been expecting. Anyway, he murmured, I should finish packing. And just like that, he was gone. Lunch passed in a blur. There was laughter, talk of upcoming holidays, Daniel offering to visit them in return. I played the part, smiling when expected, nodding at the right moments, all while acutely aware of the clock ticking toward their departure. When the time finally came, we all stepped out onto the front porch. Mark loaded the last of their bags into the trunk, while Daniel double-checked directions on his phone. Leo stood off to the side, looking out at the quiet street. As they were about to get into the car, his eyes found mine one last time. No smile this time, just a long, steady look, as if sealing something between us that neither of us would name aloud. Then he slid into the passenger seat, and the moment was gone. I watched the car disappear down the street, until it was just a shimmer in the midday heat. Inside, Daniel was already talking about dinner plans, his voice pulling me back into the routine of our life. I followed him into the kitchen, but my mind stayed elsewhere. That night, lying beside him in the dark, I replayed the weekend fragments. The kitchen conversation, the humming behind the bathroom door, the steam curling in the air, and that unguarded smile. I told myself it was harmless, that nothing had happened, and yet I knew it wasn't over. Not because I expected to see Leo again soon, but because certain moments don't fade. They lodge themselves in quiet corners of your mind, waiting for the smallest crack to slip back through.